Hello, it's Romola, and I am just checking in to our Facebook Live page, and I am hoping to see that everything is in order. I'm not sure whether we have anybody out there watching, but I must say that I've had a little concern about the flickering in my screen, but we'll see how it goes. And let me commence while we are waiting for people to actually join us by playing this very special Earth My Body prayer song in a few minutes before we actually formally start our program. Earth my body, water my blood, air my breath and fire my spirit. Earth my body, water my blood, air my breath and fire my spirit. I like to sing to the earth, I like to hold her. She likes to sing to me, she likes to hold me. I like to sing to the earth, I like to hold her. She likes to sing to me, she likes to hold me. I carry fistfuls of leaves, I make love to the breeze. I carry fistfuls of bones, I trust they will lead me home. I carry grief on my wings, I know why caged birds sing. Through many turns of this moon, my women have suffered wounds, but my grandmother's with me. Close eyes, can't you see? And my grandchildren are here, the rose, the crow, and the deer. I am surrounded by light, the light of stories. I need to quiet my mind, I need to listen. We are surrounded by light, the light of stories. We need to quiet our minds, we need to listen. Earth my body, water my body, water my breath and fire my spirit, water my spirit, water my spirit. Earth my body, water my blood, air my breath and fire my spirit. Thank you. That was late Natalie Sangorsi with the beautiful invocation for Mother Earth and our relationship with her. And as most Circle of All Nations friends know, that respect for and love for Mother Earth was the passionate focus of all William Commanda's work. And today, um, as we face the challenges of COVID, of climate change, of extreme weather and environmental disasters, as well as environmental exploitation all over the world, we're mindful about our place within this cosmic world and hope we will find ourselves at home in this. Please excuse me for 1 minute while I check. Hello? Yadini, you'd find me on the Circle of All Nations Facebook page, and you'd find the live video. I've just started it. Okay? If you have any problems, let me know. Okay. Bye-bye. These are our friends from New Brunswick calling in, and I hope they'll be able to get in okay. And I'm not sure how this is working for other folk, but I've lit the sage that Grandfather William Commanda generally started all his meetings and his outreach to people with, so that the sage would help bring our hearts and our minds and our emotions together to share and reflect on the items before us. Today, it's as a very special moment for me, and it's because it was 24 years ago that I met Grandfather William Commanda on the 11th of April. And I made a long trip to Kiriganzibi to find him, and it's that work that I was doing at that stage that eventually led me to working and supporting his Circle of All Nations work, such that it has become my passion. I'm now going to just see if there are any messages on Facebook which indicate whether there are problems or not. And otherwise, we'll continue with my plans for today. So, let me just use here and run out there. In any case, let me now move to my PowerPoint presentation. And I'm never really very good at a smooth start with these events. I'm so self-conscious and ill at ease, and I've been particularly ill at ease today because I have a flicker in my old laptop. And when I went to check on it at the store the other day, I learned that we cannot replace the graphic card which causes this flicker on these old machines like mine. So my laptop has been working very hard since 2013 and enabling us to do all sorts of exciting things on Facebook, but it's warning me that it's needing replacement pretty soon. Right now, I actually see that there is no flicker, so probably all the powers that be are enabling us to proceed well. Okay, so let me just go back and but anyway, basically today I thought it was actually going to be an easy session for me because I thought not inviting people in generally to talk, I would just really be sharing so that I could leave some record of my engagement with grandfather on this very special anniversary occasion. Um, and as I've come to do lately, I commence with really sharing this infographic visual that holds really the essence of the William Commanda prayer, one that was created last November on the occasion of his birthday, and we call it our Circle of All Nations Geocosmic Prayer and Reflection. It includes iconic symbols of importance to the William Commanda worldview, and they're incorporated in this image. Grandmother Moon, the morning star, invoking the spirit of fire, enlightenment, and the cosmic. Asin and the sleeping giant, commemorating earth creation and rock. Air, wind, movement, animating water life, emergent from the oxygen rocks of the Kitchissippi Ottawa River. Birch, wolf, eel, and turtle, honoring evolution, plant, and animal life. Turtle Island, and canoe, acknowledging the ultimate nurturer, Mother Earth, and symbolizing the enigmatic journey of life. I leave you with those words while I play this song by Kesha Moon that Grandfather Commanda loved to listen to. I'm now recording Kesha Moon, music that Grandfather Commanda loved to listen to regularly.
Isan widu kajen hatiku cecayan mendu diwi dendan itu mendu macan
Thank you. So this is our 2021 Circle of All Nations Facebook Live video event, and it's my mini retrospective on the 24th anniversary of my first encounter with the elder William Commanda. It's so funny. The last few days I was practicing Zentangles and drawing, and I realized I was rather dyslexic in the way I was expressing myself. I wrote this word untangle at first, and then I balanced it off with flow too. And then I realized it was a statement about flowing to untangle, but when you read the words in the other direction, you can untangle to flow. And this is, in fact, what I'm attempting to do. And it's our conundrum on the river of life. Excuse me, I have to try my friend again. Hello? um, Someone has been trying to reach our Facebook Live video from New Brunswick, but I think is having some problems. But I was grateful to notice that somebody is reaching us from Sweden. So something is working. And please forgive me for cutting that beautiful song off too sharply. Um, it's always a challenge managing all this technology and getting it bang on right. And I just pressed the wrong thing at the wrong moment. But nonetheless, let me tell you guys, I was really not expecting to have so many folk out here today, so much as have an opportunity to share my thoughts and leave a record of of my thoughts regarding my relationship, or excuse me, please. Hi, I'm sorry, but I'm already on my show. So you have to find Facebook, you have to find the Circle of All Nations page, and you'll see the live video happening. Okay?
Okay.
Bye.
That you?
Yeah, it's me. Bye. Sorry, my friend seems to be having trouble getting in, and I don't know um, how I can help beyond that. So, um, okay. So, what our reflections are for today is our efforts to do a circuit of bridge building to create systemic change. And this has really been the work that I was engaged in before I met Grandfather William Commanda, also the work that he was engaged in. And our first meeting happened when I was then a public servant, 17 years by that stage. And when I first engaged with Grandfather at his gatherings, many people considered I was a spy for government. It's not really the case. I was a public servant who was working very hard at that stage to build bridges between indigenous peoples and um, government, institutions, and community at large. So at that particular moment, I was involved with the Aboriginal Justice Learning Network and the April 1997 Elders Gathering. And, and I went and found some of my old books. And this one was a book that reflected on the work of the Aboriginal Justice Learning Network. You'll see our logo on the cover talking about a vision a work of vision, sharing, trust, and strength building. You'll see on the cover the images reflecting the First Nations, the Métis, and the Inuit symbols, the the sacred tree really providing the umbrella for all to gather under its shelter and exchange ideas. And you'll see our scale of justice was unbalanced at that stage, and the work was to establish balance in the relationship but between indigenous peoples and all others within the criminal justice system. And when I was looking through the book, I realized that it was actually on the 17th of April that William Commanda joined us for the elders' meetings. And you'll see we had elders from across the country participating at that very special moment. So I ended up engaged in this work after the 90s, the 80s, where there'd been a decade of Aboriginal justice inquiries across the country that indicated that Indigenous peoples were not served well by a system that was foreign to them, but also one that included many elements of overt and systemic racism. This was also the post-Oka era, post also the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, and new federal legislation to provide for better justice programs and services for Indigenous peoples. The Aboriginal Corrections Strategy was one of those initiatives, and Aboriginal peoples in the federal corrections um, uh, were part of the focus. And at that stage, I was responsible for the coordination of the Prairie Region strategy. And that is how I became so specifically involved in Indigenous justice issues. That was a period when we first began to introduce Native liaison officers, elders, Aboriginal staffing strategies, cross cultural training, and healing lodges into a prison system that had up to that point been purely punitive. Its objectives at that stage were to punish, and the indigenous correction strategy introduced new thinking into how prisons operate. It was also the time of the task force on federally sentenced women, and I recall going to the opening of the Ogima Ochi Healing Lodge in Saskatchewan. This was an initiative where people suddenly woke up to the realization that the one prison for women, the prison for women in Kingston, was unfit for bears, far less women. And, and the task force comprising the federal government, the provincial government, and Elizabeth Fry Society engaged to provide ideas for better services for women. And Indigenous women were invited to this platform, and they brought forward the most dramatically different idea in the justice system, and that was the notion of healing. I recall at that stage that law professor Trish Montour was part of that task force. And, you know, she brought her baby into the very first meeting of this bureaucratic meeting and showed that the Indigenous women were going to bring a new energy to this work and was really very, very powerful. Uh, when the center was opened, the initiative resulted in the creation of 5 prisons for women across the country, and one was the one for Indigenous women in Saskatchewan. And I flew down to its opening with the former Deputy Prime Minister Herb Gray. He was the Solicitor General of Canada at the time, and he wanted to present some of his speech to the women, to the people in Cree. And that was the first bureaucrat I think I've ever noted to be that sensitive to indigenous issues. So he was setting a tone for a new relationship back then in 19, perhaps 89, 90, something like that. Um, This was also the time of the First Nations tripartite policing policy. And the urban Aboriginal policing was the area that I particularly was engaged in. And I was involved in organizing the first policing forum in 1996. And this is the book we produced at the stage talking about building bridges and describing many strategies that police and communities had engaged in across the country to provide and promote better services for Indigenous peoples. Then we had the Aboriginal Justice Strategy, and it was the work of the Aboriginal Justice Learning Network that led me to find grandfather William Commanda in Maniwaki and invite him to serve as elder with that important work. You know, since this is my personal reflection, I found this page from my journal that I'd written when I'd returned home after visiting him. And I'd written this, you know, it was an unlikely connection. I wasn't searching, and he found me. He was not searching, and then there I was. So, this is finally how I describe our unlikely connection. Ever since our first encounter, my first engaging with him, I have felt his life, his story, unfolding in my life, in my mind, in my dream world. Even before I consciously desired the intimacy, the texture of his experiences began to etch themselves into my consciousness, maybe even my unconsciousness, determined to trace in the fault lines in my own life, my own memories, how his life, in a lifestyle transition practically from its birth, might have experienced this world. His threads bound me to his web, drew me to his roots, and yet also there I was, a global immigrant, an Indian ocean sponge, my tentacles reaching out to absorb everything. Perhaps naturally enough, then, his life could superimpose itself upon mine and shift my locus of focus. Yes, in the intensity of our connection, our initial connection, there was already a sense that I would be able to breathe some of it as he had. That despite the gulf, the immense chasm separating us, each coming from such vastly differing worlds, you know, the barriers of language, experience, ideologies, country, age, gender, race, work, background, upbringing, education, culture, religion, let alone the hardening in my bureaucratic veins, etc., 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 that I would be able to see it as he had. And in that envisioning, the revisioning, transform my understandings, my memories, my life, and yes, my responsibilities. So he is claiming more and more of my mind. Why? I, who am so self contained, am getting drawn into his head. What are we creating? A connection across timelines, land, language, and experience to confirm commonality. Why am I here in your world and why have you invaded mine? I asked silently. 4 years later, when I reflected on these thoughts again, I saw that in fact I had been coming home to myself. In understanding William Commander's Indianness, I actually came into my own. So from that background, I went up, as I said, to Kiriganzibi to meet Elder Commanda. I'd been working in Aboriginal justice since 1987 in the prairies and nationally. I was inviting William Commanda to serve as elder for our elders gathering, one in the series of 10 conferences that I coordinated across the country. I had already met Donald Marshall Jr. He was part of my Aboriginal Justice Learning Network team of storytellers. And basically, what I'm trying to do in this presentation today is share with you some of the initial ideas that grandfather and I animated over the years. And they were a huge part of our work. And where you see me highlighting things in the turquoise, I'm wanting you to follow the threads really of the systemic changes that some of our efforts ignited and were part of grandfather's blueprint for the good life. But here already we had storytellers who were part of the idiom. You know, everybody today talks about storytelling, but already Donald Marshall, Clayton Sandy, Frida M., Susan Swan, and many elders were part of the storytelling team of the Aboriginal Justice Learning Network. I had to call for directions 3 times before I found this elder with his red headband in his super hot living room, and I realized in an instant that I had met someone in a different league from anyone else I'd ever met before. Most people who've met William Commanda have felt exactly the same. What is sacred and what spirit text? William Commanda was the carrier of the sacred wampum heritage of his Algonquin ancestors of the eastern seaboard. And he shared wampum at gatherings to teach people at large about the messages of his wampum. They contributed to his own deep reflection, and he did one-to-one teaching with many people. We had a long afternoon of sharing stories. 24 years ago, I think William Commanda was somewhat surprised that he was having an okay conversation with a bureaucrat. Remember, he had spent 20 years as a chief and more besides, challenging the federal government and Indian affairs around many issues that were of huge concern to him and his community. In fact, later he told me about his conversation with the Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau in 1968 about the word justice versus just us. Yes, that was a word that William Commanda coined, though many lawyers have used it since. That was the time when the Prime Minister told William Commanda that he had heard about his problems with the Department of Justice. And William Commanda was filing his tax returns in the garbage pail, and the RCMP were after him. So anyway, to give you a little bit more context, including of this famous photo where William Commanda and Pierre Trudeau share a plate of beans, here William was asked to welcome the new Prime Minister to his new duties and to the area. William Commanda welcomed him to the territory and his country, and it is reflective of the spirit of the three-figure wampum and sharing belt. So basically, Pierre Trudeau was newly appointed as Prime Minister of Canada, and he wanted to be welcomed by the Indigenous peoples. And so one person who actually knew both of them uh, asked William Commanda to participate in the welcome. And initially, as grandfather says, the Chamber of Commerce people were wanting to prepare a speech for him to perform this welcome. But of course, William Commanda was too independent for that. And in fact, that is how he greeted the new prime minister with a welcome to his territory and his country. Pierre Trudeau decided that it would be a great idea for them to share plate of beans. And during the ensuing conversation, William Commanda had an opportunity to talk and share his thoughts about justice. Now, you'd recall from other things I've said about William Commanda that he was engaged with the North American Indian Nations government from 1945. He'd worked very hard to strengthen the voice of indigenous peoples, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But at this point, when he met the new prime minister, he was delivering for him messages that indigenous peoples across North America really had been uh, sharing and articulating. And amongst them was this message about taxation. So now, William Commanda, while he served his community as appointed as a chief, he was also working all across the country. And so, because he worked outside the reserve, he was paying taxes to the federal government. And over the years, the federal government had collected quite a bit of taxes from William Commanda. So now, at a certain stage, they were wanting people to file tax returns, but William was refusing to do that. Anyway, when they had this discussion about that, Prime Minister Trudeau said to William, well, just write me a letter to say, give me a guesstimate of how much you might have contributed to taxes, and then I'll arrange for it to be returned to you. Because, as you'll realize, Indigenous peoples living on reserves were not required to pay taxes. Um, but William Commanda kind of refused to do that because he said, if I sign such a paper, I will be agreeing that you have authority over me. And really, this is my country, this is my land, and I'm welcoming you to this. They had a very good exchange, and thereafter Pierre Trudeau invited William to come and help him fix his famous canoe, and William's wife Mary made the moose skin jacket that Pierre Trudeau wore. Uh, and really, it was a pivotal period when the thinking with respect to the white paper was moving in the direction of assimilation of indigenous peoples, but really William Commanda prepared the prime minister for thinking differently about indigenous issues. And yeah, so that was a pivotal story that he shared with me right away. But it's linked again with the spirit of wampum belt and the spirit of the three-figure wampum belt. And here are images of William Commanda welcoming other leaders to this country, to this land. Here, the Dalai Lama, but of course, he had met him first in 1991. That was before the Prime Minister of Canada was prepared to meet the Dalai Lama, and before the Dalai Lama became an honorable citizen of Canada. Here he is welcoming President Madiba Nelson Mandela to the country. This meeting taking place at the Human Rights Tribute. And this was pretty interesting in some respects because William Commanda had received an award from the Wolf Project, an award for promoting racial harmony. And his wolf was called Corona Borealis, the crown of the north. Earlier, the Wolf Project had actually presented an award to President Nelson Mandela, and his wolf was the uh, Aurora australis, the Southern Cross. And so, really, these two were connected by an energy even before this actual meeting here, which I think would have been perhaps 98. And the last image is of William Commanda meeting Queen Elizabeth at a garden party at Rideau Hall. And at this point, he was showing her a coin, a sovereign crown that she had presented him with when she took on the reign as queen. And she was so surprised to see that he still had that old thing, as she put it. And it was really, really a statement of this commitment of the sovereign relationship between the Queen and the chiefs in Canada. And William Commanda was reminding her about that message. We know that this is the moment where the Queen is mourning the loss of her husband of 74 years. Prince Philip was also there at that garden party, and he saw William Commander in his wheelchair. And he said, wow, isn't he lucky to be uh, sitting in a wheelchair? And so we know that Prince Philip did a lot of work uh, right to his late years, and we acknowledge the grieving of the royal family and others. So, several hours into our meeting in April, William Commander suddenly decided to show me something. He went to his bedroom and then returned with the bag, and then laid out on his carpet in his jam-packed living room the sacred Algonquin wampum bells. So these are not the later belts made of manufactured beads that were created by the British and others as commodity and modern artifacts and sometimes lightly spoken of as wampum diplomacy items. These were the living sacred heritage of William Commanda. That is how he described them. And I was plummeted into a sacred moment and an epic story. The Seven Fire Wampum Belt was created before the arrival of the newcomers to North America and prophesied the changes and challenges that would come into the lives of the first people in the ensuing centuries. Its messages are live and unfolding to this day. Witness COVID. This moment cemented my entrenchment with the William Commanda work. And I'm integrating the thoughts about the wampum throughout this presentation because, in fact, really, this is what William did with so many people. He shared their messages all the time so that he hoped that they would become a part of the way people animated their lives with the messages of the wampum. Okay, I'm just checking my clipboard and I see Martha's is listening. So please excuse my fumbling. Oh, and I'm so happy to see Denny and Paula are on board as well. Um, I am fumbling because I tell you what, I was worrying quite a bit this morning as my screen flickered. And so it didn't really give me a smooth sailing into today's presentation. And please excuse me for reading out so much of text. I'm actually wanting to leave a record, um, though I know the storytelling method is more meaningful really for this kind of sharing. Still, I hope some of you will ask me questions later or add your own comments to the discussion and liven it up. So really, as I said, that pivotal moment really resulted then, a few years later, in my switch from being a career woman to working with the Circle of All Nations. My Seven Fire Prophecy moment launched me into a journey of a new sort, and one of highs and lows, one of incredible gifts and insights, and also one of sacrifice. Sadly, this sometimes also demands that one imposes sacrifice on others. This is not always an easy burden to carry. It was not for William, and it is not for me. And I've required many people to sacrifice over the years as I've devoted myself to the Circle of All Nations work. I found work in government could only go so far to animate transformation. So I moved on into developing the Circle of All Nations work with William Commanda, an unfunded global eco-peace community dedicated to advancing respect and reverence for Mother Earth, indigenous wisdom, social justice, racial harmony, and peace building. These four themes actually conflate to environment and peace. And then you wake up and you realize they're the same thing. You cannot language one without the other. It's extremely challenging to awaken people to this realization. And this is where I'm at today. At one point, when grandfather was somewhat disappointed that despite his lifetime of effort across the world, and certainly here in the capital city, he found that people really weren't waking to the seriousness of the prophecies, the depth of his concern about the environmental issues, and about the violence amongst people, the wars amongst people. And he said to me, it's only going to be when Mother Earth becomes more assertive in the challenge that change is going to come. And of course, during this past year, we've had both COVID trying to wake us up, and this was really very much the message of the border crossing wampum belt, uh, that everything is interconnected, that everything is interrelated, and it's not necessarily just the positive spin of the wampum, of the interconnected message, um, that we like to oftentimes celebrate. But as part of the story, it's also the challenges, and sooner or later they impact us all. And not only did we have the onslaught of COVID over this past year, but um, before grandfather died, he said they gave me a new name. And who were the they? With the spirit energies in his world. And the new name they had given him was Isaias. And this year, no, I should say actually, it was last year, August 3rd, on the anniversary of grandfather Commanda's death, that the tropical storm Isaias launched itself over North America with devastating impact in many, many areas. And so really the kind of environmental challenges that he tried so hard to alert us to um, have continued to manifest with um, huge speed. And it's kind of ironic. I started off talking about my work in the prisons, uh, but in fact, today we are all increasingly held in prisons ourselves. Right now, with a real lockdown happening in the capital city. But when I was referencing grandfather's meeting with Pierre Trudeau, I said he talked about territory. He said, "Welcome to my territory." In the 90s, we were still entrenched in terminology and categories that no one understood, and terminology that often made no sense. So there was Indian, there was reserve, there was off reserve, there was status, there was non status, there was native, then First Nations, Inuit, Metis. Also, the first peoples of the land fell into a shifting range of departments in charge of them. From the times when the first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, made himself Superintendent of Indian Affairs, to Northern Affairs, to natural resources, to immigration, and in the 90s, First Nations and Inuit were separated from Métis and non-status, though, as in the case of William Commanda's own family, non-status could actually represent more pure blood than reserve Indian, this being, of course, Tommy Diwashi. Um, I think I became William Commander's political message because he could say, she is Indian, not him. And really, perhaps that is why he became so interested in having me part of his team. So, Aboriginal, as per the Latin ab, from. As noted in 1968, William Commanda welcomed people to his territory. When Canada, the colony of Britain, brought the Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms home in 1992, it was working hard to reconcile its early settler, newcomer, colonizer roots with its French English history of conflict and rivalry to be assuaged with policy of bilingualism. With its post World War larger European immigrants and its growing multicultural community, it was also endorsing the new Multiculturalism Act. But the problem with the first inhabitants of the land now emerged as a big challenge. And the federal government were then required to hold four rounds of constitutional discussions with First Peoples of the land to figure out where they belonged in this country. And I don't believe the fourth conference ever actually happened, but William Commanda participated in one, and that is when he first brought out the sacred wampum bells. And actually, his key message to the government at that point, that was in 1987, was that there was pollution, that the water was poisoned, the air was poisoned, and that this needed to be remedied before the end of time. And of course, though he presented that challenge to the premiers and the federal leadership at this Aboriginal Constitutional Conference, in fact, he really never waited for any of them to take care of the challenges of the environment. He launched his own campaign of awareness raising around the environmental issues. But I'll say at this point, Grandfather Commanda talked about his Mother Earth. He couldn't imagine how people could consider owning a mother, not respecting a mother, talking about all the time the relationship with this Mother Earth. And I say, and I have said many times, he realized at a certain stage that he needed to introduce people to his Mother Earth so that they would feel a part of her and also then respect and not abuse her. And that, of course, is the ongoing challenge. But he felt as the original person, not of the land, he understood her voice. So with respect to the transformations with the Constitution and the Charter of Right, I say William Commanda and his friend Jules Siwi were the root cause of the problems that Canada now began to experience with the voice of Indigenous peoples. Why do I say that? I say that the civil rights movement of North America is rooted really in the work of the North American Indian Nations government. Exactly as the United Nations was taking shape in the mid 40s, so was Jules Siwi, Huron leader, uniting and developing the voice and presence of the first peoples of North America. And he asserted this directly to the Secretary General, Chick Lee, who was the leader from Norway. I was always surprised, William Commanda told me about this, of course, and he remembered the name of this Secretary General. And I researched him and I found that actually he was somebody who paid attention to this encounter with Siwi. I think Chief Shabbat from Maniwaki was also there in this meeting in 1945, perhaps 46. When Josiwi queried the place of indigenous peoples in the United Nations. He was rather concerned that other immigrants were occupying his seat. William Commanda became actively engaged in this work and in the 50s became the supreme chief of the North American Indian Nations government. And just because we could not find mention of Jules Siwi in the Indian Affairs Library does not mean that he did not lever the rights movement of North America. He was a political prisoner too, whose life was drained by his 78-day hunger strike in Quebec, where he was held eventually without warrant. In the end, it was William Commanda and his friends who secured his release. And one day soon, I shall actually be sharing about the William Commanda Jules Siwi work in greater depth. I know we haven't done you'll see we that honor yet. But really, other movements, Martin Luther King and the civil rights activism in America, really built on the seeds that the indigenous planted right there at the United Nations those many years ago. It took quite a few decades before Canada and then later the United States acknowledged the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Uh, but William Commanda was an important seed in that work. Sadly, his work of 30 years uh, and his presentation of his position to Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau was betrayed, but still the seeds of the civil rights activism was planted by the blood, sweat, and tears of Indigenous, decimated though they had been through the multiple trails of tears across North America. So, from Aboriginal to Indigenous, how did the terminology change? Well, I was working in Aboriginal justice in the early 90s, and as a public servant, was now grateful to be serving the first peoples of this country. Earlier, I had considered myself most fortunate as an immigrant to be serving my new homeland as a parole officer, responsible for public safety and rehabilitation of the bad dudes. But this was more meaningful until I was obliged to learn I was actually a visible minority, that first peoples were lumped into my category and they didn't like it. In fact, I found they resented me more than they oftentimes resented the original colonizers. But William Commanda was busy teaching me about colonization. And as I began to understand his history, so I finally began to understand mine, both mine as a South African born in Durban and mine as an Indian, where the roots of colonization had, of course, reached India in much more devastating ways than I had ever realized. And yes, it was William Commanda who introduced me to Mahatma Gandhi by making me watch that um, documentary many, many times. He himself had already watched it countless times. And as most of the people who got trapped in Grandfather Commander's home know, he loved to teach by making us watch documentaries again and again and again till we finally began to understand the thrust of the important issues of our times. And then I began to understand how strongly his notion of identity was political as well as land based. So, when we go back to the terminology, the indigenous and the global perspectives, William wanted to know why must we be called Aboriginal? So actually did the Alberta Cree elder Peter O'Cheese. We are original. So then we studied the history of the first peoples of the eastern seaboard and tracked their history back 12,000 years and traced the 84 nations of Algonquian ancestry who had left their mark across the continent in language. So this was very, very important to William Commanda, um, seeing the spread of the Algonquins across the land. And he um, was able to share this with me by saying he could speak the dialects of the Algonquins as they moved across this continent. And eventually in 1996, he was in Chumash country and he was able to talk with the Chumash people in their language, Chumash, on the California coast. What I discovered a few months ago was that the indigenous peoples in Baja California, on the other side of the border, actually speak a version of the Algonquian language. So, in fact, yes, the Williams people, their presence across this continent can be traced through their language. We consciously started to use the word indigenous in all our correspondence with government as I began to understand really the history of the people of North America. I knew that William considered himself belonging to Turtle Island. As he said, he didn't create the border between Canada and the United States. In fact, he went so far as to say that he hadn't created the Panama Canal. So he considered himself connected with his relatives of South America. In fact, he always used a condor feather when he did opening prayers at many events after he was formally presented with the condor feather, representing yet another prophecy, the reuniting of the people of the condor and the eagle. Then he used his condor feather to mark the integrity of the continents and the people. And so we began to use indigenous quite consciously in our correspondence. And we moved away from the Aboriginal, which was the language that came with the Constitution. Because, as you recall, I was saying earlier, there was no proper word for the first peoples of the land. Also, note from the launch of the first United Nations Conference of the World's Indigenous Peoples, the Cry of the Earth, where he made the opening presentation, William exerted influence in this forum. And in this moment, he spoke in Algonquin and had himself translated. Now, he and his wife Mary, as most people have known, were fully fluent in English, French, and Algonquin. But he made a point of using the Algonquin language on this global stage, on this international platform. And, uh, and in 2019, the United Nations declared the year of indigenous languages. So the seeds planted by William in 1993 bore fruit, much like the seeds planted in the 40s bore fruit in the declaration of the uh, rights of indigenous peoples. I know Martha Davis is listening. I hope you still are there. But may I still say a special word right now to acknowledge two of our special friends who were part of that work of the Cry of the Earth conference. Uh, Martha's brother Jim Davis and also Betsy Stang with the Wittenberg Center were part of that moment. Jim, who we lost a few months ago, joined Betsy, who we lost a couple of years ago. Uh, they documented much of the activities at that forum. And there on YouTube, you'll find William Commanda and other Indigenous elders asserting their relationship with each other as Indigenous peoples, as the first peoples of all their respective lands. And you'll also find that they, at that stage, decided to call their first conference the Cry of the Earth, and the passion for Mother Earth remains strong in their work today, particularly in South America. So yeah, Martha, one day soon we're talking a little bit more about Jim. He, Circle of All Nations friends will realize, came to several of our gatherings and were a big part of our work also in the States. In fact, Betsy Stang took many of our messages to the United Nations for on indigenous peoples, on peace building, and also took our words about the Asanabka Indigenous Healing and Peace Building Center to the United Nations attention, as did our other friends from South America, Dr. Graciela Janowski, who you've met before in other Facebook Live events. So basically then, uh, uh, we're talking about identity, but William's identity was actually organic. He was Mami Minini. I'm Mamyu Minini. We travel every day, is what he said. We are the people who are always in motion, body in motion, like the cosmic. And in other presentations, you will have heard us talk so much about Grandmother Moon. Well, today is the new moon, folks, so it's an opportunity for all of you to energize with new beginnings, new opportunities, because Grandmother Moon is sending us this particular energy at this particular time. And of course, it's a particularly special time because we've just passed the equinox, another of those emotional periods in the earth cycle that is of tremendous importance. And now we're approaching here in North America the spring season, the spring, the time when fish spawn, when seeds start sprouting, when new life begins. I'm hearing the birds wake me up at 4 o'clock these days. It's the new moon. But of course, the body in motion aligns with the movement of the sun, the movement of the planets, the earth in its circuit around the sun, multiple things that the indigenous peoples of North America, and particularly the Mayan folk, registered in their calendars, but our people of North America registered in calendar, rock placement, in things that actually many of my new Facebook friends are becoming increasingly fascinated with. The representation of the solstice, the equinox, in rock formations and rock placement all across North America, all across the eastern seaboard, all across the eastern stretch. You know, we've really not known so much about the history of the people of the East, the Algonquin people, because we've paid so much more attention to the manifestation of the buildings, the pyramids, the concrete structures, and they're all very important. We've talked about Chaco Canyon before. Grandfather himself visited the Mayan Sun Pyramid. Um, but we've paid scant attention to the cultural heritage of the people of the East Coast. Perhaps that's because of our colonial history, because these were the people who were taken over earliest by the newcomers. But and it suited us perhaps to see them as um, non-people. At least that's what Pope Alexander asserted in the 1500s. But in fact, really, they were people of movement. And and what I've really started to research is the importance of movement to cognitive functioning. And I've written a paper about that in the context of William Commanda, his constant movement, his embracing of the symbol of canoe as a symbol of movement, and how I believe the brain gets exfoliated, how the brain gets stimulated by movement. And unfortunately, colonization in North America and the creation of the reserves deprived William's Algonquin people of right, this right of theirs to movement and to this particular stimulation of the brain through the movement, through the journeys. But William Commanda was body in motion, unconfinable, and borderless. And hence the other message behind that symbol of his border crossing belt. Political in some respects, but also really carrying much more that Gina Way Duggan, everything is interrelated, therefore borderless meaning. Symbolized by the canoe, his identity was reaffirmed in the fight for the protection of the American eel, where we wrote the pivotal paper to ignite the species at risk protection in 2008. Just this last week, I noticed there was a sign at Shirley's Bay, um, a sign put up by Ottawa Riverkeepers reminding people about the eel. And of course, they will remember that William Commanda ignited the fight for the American eel. In fact, later I'll post a little video clip where you'll hear him talking about eel. And this theme of movement was recently represented in the 2017 International Anthropology Conference at the University of Ottawa that honored William Commanda, that profiled the notion of movement, that included actually a Circle of All Nations workshop where we did what we are doing today. We introduced people from the grassroots into the academic conference and had presentations by both academics and grassroots people to in our efforts to bridge towards knowledge generation and knowledge sharing from multiple perspectives. And in fact, I don't know if I've said this clearly enough so far, but this effort of ours, this Facebook Global Digital Village effort to communicate, is to build bridges between Indigenous thinking, as reflected by William Commanda, Circle of All Nations, grassroots people and their voices, the voices of the non government organizations, the voices of government, and from where I sit right now, voices of the academic world. And over the last year, we've had so many young students help me with this work, help me learn how to do Facebook Live, help me create the images. I think I mentioned Maduran created the cosmic prayer image on Photoshop, articulating William Commander's spirit. Um, we've had presentations by undergrads, by grads, by PhD, by postdoctoral fellows during our presentations over the last year. But we've also had presentations by all sorts of humble folk, not part of the academic world, who've brought brilliant ideas forward. And what we believe is the co-creation of ideas that will germinate from the sharing from multiple streams is where we need to be moving into the future. And so, in fact, our effort is motional. It's the spirit of the Mami Vinini. It's the spirit of movement that we're trying to generate even in this effort. You know, I was wondering earlier today why I was doing this because it's really actually very scary to decide you're going to, you know, go and do a presentation on something to the world at large, and especially when you're not a great public speaker, but something drives us passion, and it's really to show that wow, we must all find our way to express our voice, and even if I do fumble, I do hope the ideas will reach some of you, some of us. So then we talked also about the Algonquins of the Ottawa River watershed. You know, in 2000, the mayor of Gatineau, who was then the head of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and has a city hall called the Maison du Citoyen, did not know that he was located on Algonquin territory. Larry McDermott accompanied William Commanda and I at that moment, and you know we have contributed significantly to the awakening in the National Capital Region to the presence of Algonquins. The National Capital Commission had one of the prime lookout spots over the St. Lawrence watershed up there in Gatineau Park called the Huron Lookout. William Commanda and I articulated the territorial and relational integrity of the Algonquin people of the Ottawa River watershed, and more than that, brought the people of the Quebec and the Ottawa sides, both on and off reserve, together. They were all there at his funeral. But sadly, not all understood this critical legacy, as evidenced, in the January 2021 land struggles in the National Capital Region. But we talk about the Algonquins of the Ottawa River watershed, and now it's become customary across the country for people to acknowledge the territory of the First Peoples. Just as much as I learned about the history of William's people and the history of the Algonquin people, the history of the indigenous of the North Americas, so also did I learn and did we study about the Ottawa River watershed and its incredible geological history. And we have said it's arguably the most important river in Canada. It traverses the rock evidence of four critical periods of earth creation over billions of years. The second wildest river of North America, the rocks around the Chaudière and the capital city region represent the earliest building blocks of oxygen, the life creation entity generated in the waters, in its waters, right here. And I've shared some of those rocks with you, where you can see the spores of the earliest of life forms on the earth. We've talked about water before, and we shall again at some other stage. But the most powerful element here, the water, contributed tremendously to the understanding of how the earth operates, of the laws of nature that William Commanda, but especially Grandpa Alonzo, reflected in his um, teaching. We've talked about him before. The Ottawa River became the site where the exploitation of its beaver, its trees, its water, power, its location gave birth really to the Canada we know now. We awakened attention to the river with our 2006 Water Life workshop, um, with our challenge of the expansion of the hydro dam at the Sacred Chaudière Falls in 2007, and with our engagement with the Ottawa Heritage River designation work. At that stage, William Commanda was, we joined the committee to designate this heritage river as such. And we discovered that really because it had been so desecrated, it was no longer a pristine river, that it couldn't meet the qualifications on those grounds. So it was really the cultural and historical significance that underpinned its creation as an Ottawa Heritage River. And of course, the challenges that the cultural heritage, the heritage of the first peoples of this area continue to struggle with, make it really still a very fragile reality. And furthermore, the unbridled exploitation of the river and the continued unbridled exploitation has left us most recently with floods and tornadoes and now COVID. And the latest issues pertain to the Chalk River nuclear plant and what is filtering out into the waters. During our last Facebook Live, our student Emmeline Saylor made an interesting presentation on uh, reproduction and environmental injustice. And she was talking about the impact of the mines, the devastation of the environment on the mothers, the babies, the fetuses of people in remote areas, marginalized areas, indigenous women. And so we were talking about the genocidal, really, implications of this environmental issue. But even as she was preparing her research, we discovered that Erin Brockovich um, had actually been doing research on the plastics and other contaminants in the water and was pointing out that human sperm count is going down. Um, since the 70s, going down dramatically. And the most recent report from maybe this last week indicates that by 1945, which is like 20 years, in 20 years, most people will need help with reproduction, artificial help with reproduction. So, over the last few years, we've been worrying about the burgeoning population of the world, the 8 billion people now occupying the earth. But really, the environmental damages that we are inflicting on the earth are frankly much more worrisome in the plastics, in the microplastics, in the PCBs, in the ongoing mining and disastrous release of contaminants uh, than perhaps the people on the earth. Unfortunately, I've just heard that Namibia, that amazing part of the landscape of Southern Africa, is now being threatened by mining interests, and Canadian corporations are engaged in part of the story. So it's really devastating. But right now, when we are worrying about what to do with the Chalk River waste, um, we realize we don't have easy answers, and really need much more wisdom to be brought to the table than is currently the case. That is, of course, why William Commanda had hoped to see the Asanabka Indigenous Center established at Chaudia, Victoria Island, so that it would serve as a think tank for these critically important issues, so that everybody who would recognize really that everything is interconnected, everything is interrelated, would then put their best ideas forward to deal with the catastrophes that are on our hands. Um, Extensive information on this legacy vision is available on our website, which has been developed and maintained for us by Karen Bisson. Many thanks to her. Uh, the vision for this Indigenous Center was sadly appropriated by the corporate sector via the ZB windmill developments and abandoned really by Algonquin and fragmented by supporters. But we continue to animate the virtual Asanabka, and multiple people are now once again contributing to it. Now it takes the form in this digital global village, such that social media and the continuing reach of the William Commanda voice and passion and Facebook technology enables us to animate. Yeah, quite devastatingly, the thwarting of that vision has resulted in the further desecration of a singular sacred indigenous site of geocosmic and Paleolithic importance. And we do believe that the energy of the earth, the energy of the ancestors, which now includes, of course, William Commanda, and even more radical a personality, his niece Daisy Jaco Commanda, and her son now, John. A lot of energies that were so protective of Mother Earth are now part of Mother Earth. And Mother Earth is reflecting her unhappiness in so many ways. Ginawe Daganuk, that's the other word that William Commanda introduced us to, uh, introduced us in the Circle of All Nations to, and it was about the deep understanding of the interrelatedness of everything. And it contributed to the constant prayer and mantra on William's lips, and in his spirit and in his work. And given all that he knew about people and institutions, it required considerable strength to affirm with compassion, no boxing gloves. Circle of All Nations continues to make efforts to build bridges, and when there are no gates and no gatekeepers, the work is magic and evolutionary in its nature. And it takes a tremendous biodiversity of talents and capacities to manifest in new forms, yet retain consistency with its fundamental, foundational principles. We say, like grandfather, that we need to be good enough for two and need to come together with one heart, one mind, one love, and one determination to create a circle of all nations, a culture of peace. Uh, you know, I selected quite a few photos for this very wordy PowerPoint presentation, but because of my flickering screen that I was telling you about earlier, my graphics card that isn't working so well, I didn't get to include all of them. But here you'll see grandfather in his very busy library living room, still in his pajamas, but checking on some printing. I see, ever busy, or while the television is going and he's keeping up with his news. So, from a kindergarten dropout to a research PhD, in 2005, we wrote the book Learning from a Kindergarten Dropout. With an honorary PhD by the University of Ottawa, in 2011, a second one by Université de Québec Outaouais. The Chancellor and former Governor General Mikhail Jean created the William Commanda Hall at the University of Ottawa in 2014. Carleton University named the Indigenous Students Resource Center Ajigonang after him in 2014. And I completed our PhD entitled Dienawe Daganuk and the Circle of All Nations, the remarkable environmental legacy of William Commanda, structured around the Circle of All Nations logo. And P.S. He was also appointed Officer of the Order of Canada, this country's highest honor for those who desire a better country, as indeed he did. Um, William Commanda, Mami Winini, traveled widely across France, Switzerland, Japan, Mexico. After I met him and took early retirement, we drove all across the Atlantic seaboard several times and around the Great Lakes area and beyond. We also went to Germany, South Africa, the Bahamas, New Mexico, and the Oregon coast. We were constantly in motion between Kiriganzibi and Canada. In fact, William Commanda decided to move in here in Canada himself and keep house when I traveled to South Africa. Tennessee Mike will remember that story. I had a poster by Indigenous artist Daphne Ojic from the early 80s, really before I was involved in anything Indigenous, formally Indigenous. And uh, uh, the poster I have was the comforting one in the Grandfather Suite series. And little did I know that later in life that actually Grandfather Commanda would be occupying a suite right here in my home, in my condo. And we were both very fortunate to meet Daphne Ojic at an art exhibition at the Museum of History um, before both of them died. Yeah, so that was a very special moment. Uh, I hadn't actually included this in my presentation, but let me also add, one day I shall do a presentation about all the William Commanda firsts. In a sense, what I'm doing today is a presentation that shows you our contribution to systemic change in the thinking on Indigenous issues, both here in Ottawa, both here in Canada, but also beyond. And William Commanda also did the initial blessing at the National Art Gallery. And it was after that that the work of artists like Robert Davidson found their place in that establishment. So really, William broke grounds, opened doors for Indigenous peoples, left, right, and center here in Ottawa and beyond. Mm, And I wanted to make just a quick mention of the systemic constellation work of Bert Hellinger and also our friend Karl-Heinz Rauscher, who actually wrote a book about William Commanda. William Commanda launched the first conference on systemic constellation with ceremony in Würzburg, Germany. And what's interesting is that the systemic constellation healing therapy program is grounded to some extent on the knowledge of the indigenous peoples of the Zulus. And, you know, we've talked about Credo Mutwa, a Zulu shaman who we met in South Africa, um, whose energies are reflected in this work of linking with the spirit, the energies of the ancestors. Bert Hellinger learned and really drew inspiration, I think, from his years working with the Zulu people, but also developed this idea about a process of movement to contribute to healing. And we can talk about that at another workshop because we actually studied that at great length, and it's really, really something so desperately needed today. Okay, and so now on to canoe. Canoe as a teaching tool and as a metaphor of life. William Commanda is a world-renowned canoe maker. He built a canoe for Queen Margaret of Denmark at the Roskilde Museum. And 2 years ago, Winnie Lawson reconnected us with young Scamby, who had actually come and found William Commanda and taken him and Mary, his wife Mary, to Denmark to build this canoe. A canoe dedicated to the work of William and Mary was opened at the millennium launch of the Canoe Museum, which is the legacy work of our friend Kirk Wipper. Valerie Poyen created Good Enough for Two, canoe documentary pro bono to support William's work. Todd Labrador and Maureen Bartholomew were involved in this as well. We organized Paddle for Peace events at Victoria Island, and we shall actually be talking much more about the canoe and the Good Enough for Canoe video creation with Valerie Poyen and Todd Labrador on May 23rd. So when we'll return to formal presentations with other guests joining us. And that'll be pretty special because for tous les amis qui parlaient le français, je m'excuse, je ne parlais pas le français bien, donc c'est une grande omission dans notre Facebook Live, manquer la voix, la personne française. Mais Valérie parlait mieux en français par l'anglais. Donc, in May, I've also invited our friend uh, Big Bear Ron Goddard to come and join me. He will be talking about his uncle Joseph Fournier's canoe building, Algonquin canoe birchbark building heritage. But he also parles au français. You've heard him before talking about sweetgrass on one of our Facebook Lives. He'll be joining us and we'll be having a dialogue au français avec anglais on May 23rd. Perhaps if Dominique Cote joins us, she's the one who translated our prayer for us. Perhaps she'll help navigate the conversation. Okay, so then I wanted to say that over the years, we've created a prolific list of communications tools to spread the William Commanda Circle of All Nations story. Books, videos, social media. And I want to say a special thank you to our friend Karen Bisson, who's our lead with our graphics design work. Right from the beginning, she put together our Learning from a Kindergarten Dropout book and has been tireless in her support of the work of grandfather and of me over many, many years. And she has maintained our Sanabka website. She created the commemoration video, and I maybe will show it to you later, maybe of the Circle of All Nations. Thank you, Karen, for your work with our communications. The late Normand Champlain created our first Grandfather Commanda birthday book. And here you'll see is a picture of Valerie Poyen, who's going to join us on May 23rd. She's the camera lady of Good Enough for Two. And, you know, it was so interesting. What she talked about in her little speech up here was looking at grandfather, and all of a sudden she saw a grandparent in his face. And she said this to somebody standing beside her, and that person said, well, you know, I looked at him and I could see my mother. And all of a sudden, people were talking about how they were seeing close relatives reflected in the face of William Commanda. This is written in like when grandfather turned 90. So, you know, the theme of Gina Daganuk, it is all interrelated. It's already a part of the work for a long time. This book um, um, is entitled, here's the cover, and it's entitled A Few Reflections on the Very Special Occasion of Your 90th Birthday, William Commanda, Grandfather Commanda. But I just mentioned the word reflections. You know, the academic world is now using words like reflections and things like that quite prolifically. And as I said, with the storytelling word as well, already part of the circle language for a long time. And really, what we're wanting is for the grassroots people to be acknowledged as important creators of knowledge, and yeah, see that kind of evening out and equality becoming the stream of the future. I'll show you this image as well because I'm going to talk to you a little later about Colleen Goodchild. And here you'll see in that faded picture that she is visiting Grandfather Commander here in Canada, and he actually brought out his wampum belts to talk to her about the message of the Seven Fires prophecy. And I'll read this to you. Sacred smoke, she wrote. I sat with a man who showed me so much in the twilight hours of a birthday afternoon. I sat with a man who opened a door for me, a doorway to a beauty the likes of which I cannot forget. I listened to a gentle voice speak of a history I could not have remembered, of a place where time stood still and quahog beads told stories of simpler days. I heard of who we were, of where we went, and as we spoke, I watched the sacred smoke dance through the room on words of ancient wisdom with no particular place to go, and so settled in my heart. I sat with a man whose voice became the wind, and that wind took me to places that became the gifts to my soul. His words became wings, and I traveled far. His smile was a rainbow's laughter to me. His gift came to me in words so beautiful that they have left me with such a well measured memory of that perfect, perfect day. It was my birthday in March 2002. My gifts were grandfather's words to me, and they were beautifully wrapped in his warm and loving smile. Happy birthday, grandfather. This is from Colleen and Fred Goodchild. And later, or some of you may already know, that Colleen has painted a portrait of Grandfather Commanda, and she's actually uh, uh, selling tickets to it to support the Circle of All Nations work. You know, she asked me about this, and as you may or may not know, the Circle of All Nations work is entirely unfunded. Though I had come from government, where I had been actually responsible for many funding programs, William Commander really didn't want any of our work to be funded by sources that could limit the potential and the capacity of the work to move. And what I found actually in terms of my work with the Aboriginal Justice Learning Network and the Aboriginal Policing Forum is that they actually really stagnated. Today, 30 years after the 90s, we find that, gosh, the the near genocidal rates of incarceration of indigenous peoples, the racism, the lack of healing, the problems that continue to manifest. And of course, now with COVID and everybody contracted in close quarters, challenges are just only increasing. But but that was one of the reasons why we decided we would do our work with our own steam. Many people have helped along the way. People have helped in accordance to their passions. Many people came and volunteered to support at the gathering. So we had massive turnouts to those life transforming experiences, the Circle of All Nations gatherings. Other people translated bits and pieces of our text for us. Other people, like Valerie, created the documentary pro bono to support the William Commanda efforts, things like that. But by and large, the work has just gone on with this team of people. But Colleen came up with this idea, and I mean, what fitting way for a portrait of Grandfather William Commanda to continue to serve his cause? And certainly, you know, if we had a little bit of support, we'd be able to produce our materials in a much more professional way than we have. But talking about books and videos and materials, we have um, we have two books on. Well, you've seen this one where grandfather's part of the historical contributions of the Gatineau folk, but here's a kindergarten dropout book one. Here's our kindergarten dropout book two. Here's our Circle of All Nations paddle, water book, healing book. Many products we have. I would like to also show you the contributions of our multiple friends. The canoe video. This is the awakening video created by Jeremy Wright. Our friend Adrian Esposito, our Asperger syndrome friend, who created this amazing documentary on healing, which I think everybody is needing today, because my gosh, the cry for healing is getting so loud. National Film Board documentary created by Lucy Wilmette. Here's Patrick Gravel's the sagesse of the elder, the wisdom of the elder. Jean Letellier, Sambo also created another documentary along the same lines, the William Commanda 7-Fire Prophecy story. Here, there's an excerpt of William involved with our Wolf Colleague Project colleague, Ray Sundstrom, and his challenge of racism. And yeah, we've got lots of materials that we need to be making accessible to more people. And also then we've had the William Commanda presence on Facebook. And I just actually saw our newest upcoming students send me a little message. We've got two new graphic students who are joining us for the summer. COVID has actually presented Circle of All Nations with opportunities. And these include the placement of some students, some COVID co-op students, who will then be helping me upscale my graphic skills and my tech skills so that we can actually do a presentation like today's in a much smoother fashion. But hello, Jonathan, and hello, Jenny. Jenny's actually doing an exam today, but she'll be joining us, and we've introduced you to our other friends before. We're grateful, let me say, to the Facebook technology that has enabled us to animate a digital global village and to leave a record of our work for the public at large. And we've found that over the past year, thousands of people have actually paid attention to our videos. And so we have a student, Maduran, who's breaking down the videos so that they can be segmented into focus topics, because we tend to ramble on around many themes, but we're wanting really our core themes of child and youth care work, of Indigenous justice, of environmental stewardship, of the Donald Marshall efforts, to be readily accessible as teaching tools. And so we're going to be refining our videos so that they can be used by people. And of course, Facebook allows us to share everything with public at large. So we're really like an open source um, uh, place. I know my friend Paula, who's actually, I think, still listening to me, uh, was saying, Romola, you should just speak, never mind about the text and the writing and the paperwork. But I was saying to her, you know what, Paula, but we're trying to reach multiple people. We're wanting to reach people who can listen and feel with their hearts and their energies. But we're also wanting to reach academics who can try to understand the depth behind this thinking and the importance of some of the underlying themes of our work. And so we complement our work with the academic articulations. And did I say, gosh, a big thank you to Karen for her work with all of those things. Um, so then we've animated our work with gatherings, with teachings and conceptual tools. So grandfather animated this work in a variety of ways, and we've talked about the Sunbow 5 walk for Mother Earth and healing, the actual journey, the gatherings, his outreach to government, environmental organizations, diverse communities, and his peace events at Chaudière, Victoria Island. We developed many conceptual tools, and I want to show you just a few to show you that, while the digital world is pretty damn exciting, in fact, we hosted a meeting with Hopi Elder in Hotavilla um, via a telephone technology well before the world heard about Skype, well before the world heard about Zoom. And we pulled grandfather's television. Actually, his son-in-law of the time, Kevin, helped us set up the technology. And we broadcast a conversation between William Commanda at his gathering in Maniwaki out there on the lake with Hopi Elder in Arizona, um, sharing indigenous wisdom, maybe 2003 or something like that. And then here, I'm not going to show it to you very well, but these are some of the conceptual tools that we now have online, but that we created in transparencies in the old days. This one in particular is the frog principle. When I tried to try and figure out how it was that we could possibly create a culture of peace when we had so many challenging issues to deal with. And Karen and I did this amazing thing by hand. And then she typed it up. So these are several transparencies, and as you superimpose one upon the other, you see various elements of the story presenting. The reason I'm really showing it to you now like this is to say that when you guys are looking at, the cloud, the word cloud formations that technology now presents, we seeded that idea in our efforts, my goodness, 20 years ago. And I have more, but I think you get the point. And finally, I'll say our medicine wheel, which is here in our text and elsewhere, features in the 2021 Global Climate Coaching event, a 24-hour event that we were invited to share Circle for Nations teachings to. And we talked really about our planning using the medicine wheel. And it was a really pretty neat event that reached people all over the world. And even as I started to talk about this tool and expanded on how we used it, I realized how powerful it is. And it really was one of our efforts then to bridge between cultures, to conceptually present complex ideas that were different for a range of people, but that could help move us towards a similar stream of thinking around certain issues that were really of importance. And why? Because we're wanting to integrate knowledge systems, integrating indigenous, grassroots, NGOs, governments, and academia, bridge building to ignite diversity and common purpose, finding our rightful places on the penultimate provider, Mother Earth, with respect, responsibility, and reverence, embracing our common heritage as cosmic beings. Gina Daganov, that is all related, all is connected. So here then, I'll tell you a little bit more about Colleen Gray, and this is the poster of grandfather that she's asking you guys to contribute to, so that it can help us perhaps get better technological tools to help advance this work in better ways. Um, Um, and also, Colleen does the Art for Aid campaign where she collects art supplies and ships them out to indigenous communities, sparking the creative energy, the creative spirit. And of course, that consistent with grandfather's canoe baking and consistent with all Circle of All Nations work underlies our efforts. The animation of the creative, the animation of the spirit of creativity to contribute to spiritual growth and healing and development. And yeah, such an important fundamental theme and effort. And as you would have recalled from the text that I read, she's been doing this kind of thinking since 2002 at least, if not earlier. Uh, yeah, and then I want to just show you this amazing painting that our friend Naita Sa Eagles sent to me to be really part of our Circle of All Nations kind of work and legacy. And I love it because it carries the luminosity of all the ideas without the words. I can sort of see a butterfly or a moth birthing. And of course, butterfly is so much a symbol of transformation. It moves from the pupa, the little seed, to becoming, this caterpillar that eats and absorbs everything, consumes. Then it settles itself into a cocoon. It makes really caterpillar soup out of itself. Then it reconstitutes itself as this amazing butterfly. And then, even as it emerges from its cocoon, it has to stay still for a long time to get its strength, to dry off before it's able to fly and can contribute to the world. Amazing thing. And so there with that green, with that gold, with that hope, with that light, thank you very, very much for sharing this with us. And next time I'm going to share with you something that was written by David Brody about his linkages with grandfather Commanda, but I can't today because we're still awaiting his photograph. So many people have wanted to contribute to this moment and event, but I'm going to kind of just like skip through the rest of my presentation here because you've seen many of these key themes already. It's consistent with what we share every day. The ideological foundations of our work and the animative actions we have taken and continue to take. A little bit more background information about William Commanda, the new colleagues that have joined us over the last few sessions, the cybercartographic work that we're also attempting to advance at Carleton University so we can leave a record, a place-based record of the William Commanda work in the universities. Students actually really don't understand him very well because though he has a name place at both Carleton and Ottawa University, students actually don't really know yet, and especially Indigenous students don't really yet know much about the William Commanda work, but we hope we will leave a record that they will find of interest. And of course, we consider Facebook and our live videos our cybernetic work, where we are so time-paced, so fast-paced, and that becomes then the other thread of the knowledge generation. Here's our landing page created by a student to be animated this year with the development of our atlas as well as our new Circle of All Nations website, which has been like stagnant, and more details about us here. But thank you very much for that long presentation, for your patience with that. Um, and now let me go in the last remaining minutes to see if I have anybody who would like to chat with us. Oh gosh, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to ask: does anybody want to share anything right now with the crowd, or shall I just basically say goodbye? Um, so I am just going to actually, Delphina, okay, just let me see here. Okay, so Delphina is listening in. Carolyn Carson. Delphina's put a poem in. I think I'm going to leave out the conversations unless I see somebody specifically writing that they want to say something on the other page. And I suppose I am then going to take the last minute to finish off with some music. And this, you probably, some of you will have heard before. It's a musical video that my nephew created. And that's not actually what I should have done. Yes.